Okay, so right about now you've got your Abra do-it-yourself flashing LED music kit, which is right here. Kind of a cool little kit. And as always, you probably want to read instructions before you begin. I found through my experience that the best thing to do is, give yourself a thorough understanding of how to solder so you don't waste the parts. These parts are not something that you have 10 of each. So once you ruin one part, you kind of ruin the whole project. Specifically, the part I'm talking about today is the integrated circuit board, which is right here. And I found that putting that on, because there's so many solder points, that if you get that on right, the rest is home free. So what I'd like to do is, even though the instructions don't show putting that on first, I know from experience that that's probably the best part to put on first. If you can do that, you could probably do all the remaining parts. That being said, you want to be organized. You want to make sure you have all the parts, and you want to go through these piece by piece by piece. Like I said, these instructions are pretty good, but let me at least get to emptying out the bag. And what I like to do is I'll carry myself a little Tupperware around, which would be something like that. So take the parts out, see what we got. Here's your circuit board. We'll put that aside for a second. And everything else, I'm just going to empty into the bag, empty into my little container. And the first thing I'm looking for is the part that I want to put on first. There's many parts you're going to learn throughout the course, and some really need some good explaining and a kind of a know-how to put these things on. So here's the integrated circuit board, which is basically the brains of this little project that we're about to do. So let me kind of zoom in on this a little bit. And what you'll notice on here is there's a little tiny, I want to call it, let me get a pen here. There's a little indentation right there. It's got a little half moon shape. Hopefully you can see that. Alright, that has to be lined up on the circuit board appropriately. So anytime you're doing these, you're going to want to look for that little groove. Usually the circuit board shows that same groove on one side where it's supposed to be put. Let me show you what that looks like. So if I'm looking at my circuit board, that would be that groove right there, same indentation, and that's telling you how to put that on the board. These are poke through parts, and the best way of actually getting this thing set up, and I'm going to show you this in a second, is first make sure all the pins are not bent, and you don't want to over bend them because they do break pretty easily. And what I'm probably going to have you do is we'll poke this part through very carefully, because if you break the pin, it's kind of game over. I'm going to make sure that's lined up. When it is, it should go through pretty easily, as long as you got any pins that are really busted. And I'll show you, I probably got one here that's giving me a hard time, because when it comes out of the bag, you got to remember that these things are really sensitive. And see this pin right here, that one's a little bent, so let's bend that back. Everything else looks pretty square. Line up the little groove again, and you're going to end up popping that thing through. And I think the best thing to do after you get this thing in place, I said mine's pretty hemmed up. Best thing to do after you get this thing in place is tape it with a little Scotch tape. What that's going to do is it's going to allow you to get some joints soldered on without it falling off backwards. Oh, let's do this right. I think I'm all freed up. And that looks pretty good. We got a couple of bent ones right there, so you want to look for that. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. That's kind of skewing off to the left, so we'll bend that back. And once again, this came this way right out of the bag, probably because, it gets all shipped, and shipping it gets moved around pretty easy. There, we're in. So once again, flip that around. We want that to be facing the right way. It's nice to make a few mistakes because then you catch them on camera. Now we're in. Hopefully yours goes a little bit easier, but that's what you got to do. You got to play around with that, get that on there. Now the next thing I'm going to do so it doesn't fall off and I don't have this problem again, I'm going to take a little Scotch tape, just enough to hold me in place. I'm going to tape it on because I'm going to be soldering on the other side, and I'm going to kind of put it there. Now I know that probably won't go anywhere. I'll fold it over the edge like that. And that's just to give me a little bit of cushion so I can push on this thing and it won't fall out. And then when I look on the back side, we'll flip this around. These are the joints that you're going to want to start with first. And once again, these points are very, very close to each other. So when you're soldering, you're going to want to make sure that you don't drip any solder onto any other joint other than what is exposed. That copper point right there, they should only get one little drip, and it should look like a perfect little bullet, like a nice little teardrop shape on every single joint. If you can nail all these, flip it around, nail all those, the rest is pretty easy. So you're getting the hard part out of the way. If you end up doing something where you short circuit some of these pins, you're going to want to remove that solder and try it again and try not to overheat it. It's all finesse. You get this part done, the rest of it's pretty easy. So the next video I'm going to show you is how to set this up on your helping hands and how to go about starting that first joint. We're going to work backwards from the middle out. We're going to do this joint, 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 and then we're going to flip it around. We'll have our soldering iron facing this joint, and you'll see on the video. Thanks.